Have you ever felt completely surrounded by people, yet utterly, devastatingly alone? It's a strange, counterintuitive thought, but what if the greatest poverty isn't having an empty bank account, but having a full one with no one real to share it with? We're often told that money solves all problems, but this is the story of a man who discovered that his fortune was the source of his greatest misery. He was a tycoon who had everything he could ever want, yet he was starving for something that couldn't be bought, a genuine human connection. This is the unbelievable, emotional, and heart-aching story of Carl Simpson, a billionaire who did the unthinkable. This is the tale of how a tycoon fled his life to live as a poor man, trading his penthouse for the pavement in a desperate search for meaning. On the other side of the city, there was Katherine Butler, a woman who struggled to make ends meet but possessed a wealth of spirit that Carl's billions could never match. Their two worlds, separated by an impossible gulf of status and fortune, were about to collide in a way that destiny itself couldn't have predicted. The stage for our story is set when Carl, at his absolute lowest and stripped of his identity, is shown a simple act of kindness from the one person who has every reason to keep her resources for herself. The woman who helped him survive, Katherine, offers him help without a second thought, seeing only a man in need, not the monumental secret he was hiding. This single, pure moment of connection becomes the foundation for everything that follows, a beautiful love story built on a catastrophic lie. This sets in motion a fragile, high-stakes relationship where every shared laugh and every moment of trust hangs by the thread of his hidden identity. How long can a man keep up such a monumental deception, especially as he starts to experience true love for the very first time? We are about to witness a journey filled with unexpected turns, a shocking plot twist that will shatter hearts, and the agonizing question of whether forgiveness is possible after such a deep betrayal. It is a powerful story about what happens when a carefully constructed lie is the only path to a man's ultimate truth. This journey of overcoming, redemption, and the search for true love will challenge everything you think you know about wealth, happiness, and the human heart. Before we dive into this incredible story, we want to feel our connection with you. Please take a moment to comment below and tell us from which beautiful city you are watching right now. We want to know how far our story has traveled. And if you feel this story resonating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone whose heart you think it will touch. Well, let's talk about a man who had it all, or so it seemed. The world knew him as Carl Simpson, a veritable tycoon whose name was synonymous with success, etched onto skyscrapers and whispered in boardrooms. Yet, inside his gilded cage, a profound emptiness echoed louder than any applause. He felt a desperate need for something real, something money couldn't buy, and so he made a choice that would shatter his universe. He decided to disappear, to shed his skin and become a ghost in his own city, a simple poor man searching for an authentic human connection. He traded his tailored suits for tattered clothes, and his penthouse view for the cold, unforgiving pavement of the city's underbelly. It was a brutal awakening, a baptism by icy rain and gnawing hunger. The transition was more than just a change of scenery, it was a complete annihilation of his identity. For the first time, Carl understood what it meant to be invisible, to be looked through as if he were nothing more than a crack in the sidewalk. This was a raw, unfiltered reality he had only ever observed from the tinted windows of his limousine, and now it was his life. Just as the despair began to truly set in, a light appeared in the form of Katherine Butler. She wasn't an angel in the traditional sense. She was a waitress with tired eyes and a heart that had clearly weathered its own storms. Yet, she saw something in the desperate eyes of this stranger that others didn't. She didn't see a bum or a failure, she saw a human being struggling to survive. Her simple act of kindness, offering a warm cup of coffee and a sandwich she likely couldn't afford to spare, was a lifeline he didn't even know he was searching for. That small gesture struck Carl with the force of a physical blow. In his world, every favor had a price. Every kindness was a calculated move in a larger game of power. But this was different. It was genuine, offered with no expectation of return. It was in that moment, holding the warm cup in his trembling hands, that he realized his quest for something real had led him directly to her. This woman, Katherine Butler, with so little to her name, possessed a richness of spirit that made his billions feel like worthless paper. Of course, this beautiful, heart-aching moment was built upon a monumental foundation of deceit. He was a tycoon playing the part of a poor man, and she was an unsuspecting soul offering charity to a billionaire. The secret he carried was a ticking time bomb, a hidden identity that could obliterate the only genuine connection he had ever found. Every word he spoke to her, every grateful smile he offered, was part of a role he was playing. But weirdly enough, it was the most honest had ever felt in his entire life. He knew he couldn't just walk away from her. This wasn't just about his experiment anymore, it was about her. He felt an inexplicable pull, a need to be near this beacon of goodness. He had to find a way to stay in her orbit, to understand what made her so different, even if it meant diving deeper into his charade. The irony was staggering. The man who could have anything in the world found himself desperately needing the simple, continued kindness of a woman who had almost nothing, setting the stage for a very complicated love story. The first few weeks were a lesson in brutal humility for Carl Simpson. Every aching muscle and every pang of hunger was a stark reminder of the life he'd so casually abandoned. He, who had never known a moment of true physical hardship, now understood the exhaustion that seeps into your bones from walking miles for a mere chance at a meal. The harsh realities of poverty weren't just about lacking money, they were a full frontal assault on the body and spirit, a constant battle just to survive. He was no longer a player in the game, he was a piece being swept off the board. Gone were the chefs, the drivers, the assistants who insulated him from the world. Now his world was the biting wind, the damp cardboard he tried to sleep on, and the gnawing loneliness that was a far colder companion than any winter night. It's a funny thing, isn't it? A man can be surrounded by people in a bustling city and feel utterly, completely alone for the first time in his existence. His name, once a key that opened any door, was now just a soundless word in his own mind, a relic of a former life. He learned that hunger makes you resourceful in ways he'd never imagined. He, a tycoon who once judged the quality of gourmet meals, now felt a surge of victory finding a day-old loaf of bread. The stark contrast was almost comical, a dark joke played on him by destiny. This wasn't an exercise in character building anymore. This was a desperate struggle for existence. He was truly a poor man, stripped of everything but the secret that was becoming more of a burden with each passing day he managed to survive. The physical struggle was immense, but the emotional toll was the real killer. It was the shame of being ignored, the crushing weight of invisibility. In his old life, his presence commanded attention. Here, his presence was an inconvenience to be avoided. This profound isolation was a crucible, burning away the arrogance and leaving behind something raw and vulnerable. He was breaking down, piece by painful piece, and he wasn't sure what, if anything, would be left in the end. It was a terrifying, humbling, and utterly transformative experience. This crucible of suffering forged a new kind of appreciation within him. Every small comfort, every minor victory, felt monumental. A dry place to sleep during a storm felt like a luxury suite. A kind glance from a stranger felt like a warm embrace. He was being recalibrated, his entire system of value being forcibly rewritten by the harsh hand of reality. He was learning a language of survival he never knew existed, and it was the hardest lesson of his life. And in the midst of this despair, the memory of Katherine's simple kindness became his North Star. It was the one warm thought in a universe of cold indifference. That single cup of coffee was more than charity, it was proof that goodness still existed, and it gave him a reason to push through one more day. He clung to that memory, that heart-aching moment, because he instinctively knew his ability to survive depended on more than just food or shelter, it depended on hope. Katherine Butler wasn't naive, she knew the world was a tough place because she lived that reality every single day. She worked double shifts at the diner, her feet constantly aching, just to make rent on her tiny one-room apartment. Her own cupboards were often sparse, a testament to her daily struggle. Yet, despite her own hardship, she couldn't turn a blind eye to the suffering of others. It simply wasn't in her DNA. When she saw the man who called himself Carl, she didn't see a statistic, she saw the deep, haunting sadness in his eyes. So she started sharing. It began with coffee, then a sandwich, and soon it became a regular occurrence. She'd pack a little extra for her lunch, knowing she would see him on her way home. To an outsider, it might have seemed foolish, a poor woman giving away what little she had. But for Katherine, this act of kindness was a non-negotiable part of who she was. She believed that you share the light you have, no matter how small the flame. It was a simple philosophy that she lived with profound grace. She never asked him for his story or judged his circumstances. In her eyes, he was just a decent man who had been dealt a bad hand. Everybody's one bad day away from needing help, she'd often say to her friends at the diner, shrugging off their concerns. Her compassion was pure and unconditional, a rare commodity. In a world that often demands a reason for everything, she saw the good in him, a quiet dignity that persisted beneath the ragged clothes and the weary expression. This daily ritual became a small, sacred moment for both of them. For Carl, it was a lifeline, a tangible piece of proof that he hadn't been forgotten by the world. Her presence was a balm to his fractured soul. He started to look forward to seeing her, not just for the food, but for the light in her eyes and the genuine warmth of her smile. This heart-aching routine was becoming the very foundation of his will to survive, a testament to the incredible power of simple human kindness. Katherine, in turn, found a strange comfort in their interactions. Helping him gave her a sense of purpose beyond her own struggles. It was a reminder that even when she felt powerless in her own life, she could still make a positive impact on someone else's. His gratitude was so sincere, so profound, that it enriched her own life in unexpected ways. Theirs was a symbiotic relationship of the soul, built on the currency of compassion rather than cash. She had no idea, of course, of the monumental secret he was hiding. She saw a poor man, humble and grateful, and her heart went out to him. She couldn't have possibly imagined that the man she was sharing her meager meals with could have bought the entire city block without a second thought. And it was this beautiful, unvarnished perception of him that made Carl realize he couldn't just be a passive recipient of her grace, he had to find a way to be near it always. Driven by a need he didn't fully understand, Carl knew he had to do more than just wait for Katherine's daily visits. He wanted to earn his place, to be a part of her world, even if it was a world of struggle. He followed her to the diner one day and, swallowing every ounce of his TYCOON pride, asked for a job. The manager took one look at his disheveled appearance and offered him the only position available, a dishwasher, the lowest rung on the ladder. Carl accepted without hesitation. It was a chance to be close to her. The work was brutal, a chaotic symphony of clattering dishes, scorching water, and endless grime. The man who once orchestrated billion-dollar mergers now found his hands raw and blistered from scrubbing pots. It was a humbling, almost surreal experience. He was clumsy and inefficient, a fish so far out of water he was practically on the moon. The fast-paced environment of a busy kitchen was more foreign to him than any international market, a true test of overcoming his ingrained sense of self-importance. This is where Katherine's true nature shone once more. Instead of getting frustrated with the clumsy new dishwasher, she showed him patience and guidance. During lulls in service, she would stand beside him, gently showing him how to stack plates. For efficiency, how to manage the workflow. It's all about finding a rhythm, she'd say with a smile, completely unaware of the irony of her words. She was teaching a master of the universe the simple rhythm of a menial job, and her kindness made the hard work bearable. Through this process, Carl learned more than just how to wash dishes. He learned the value of honest labor, the quiet dignity in a job well done, no matter how small. He saw the world from a completely new perspective, the perspective of those who worked tirelessly just to get by. Katherine was his teacher, and her lessons were in humility, grace, and resilience. This shared experience, working side by side, began to weave the threads of their connection into something stronger, the beginnings of a real love story. He cherished these moments. The quiet conversations over the roar of the kitchen, the shared smiles of exhaustion at the end of a long shift. He was living a life that was, by all accounts, harder and poorer than anything he could have imagined, yet he felt a sense of contentment that had always eluded him. He was earning his keep, and, more importantly, he was earning the respect of the one person whose opinion had started to matter more than anyone else's in the world. Of course, the fear of his hidden identity was a constant shadow. Every time she praised his progress, a pang of guilt shot through him. He was a fraud, a tycoon masquerading in a dishwasher's apron. But the longer he stayed, the more this new identity started to feel real. He was Carl, the hard-working dishwasher, and he was falling for Katherine Butler. He just hoped his past wouldn't suddenly come crashing down on this fragile new life he was building. Life settled into a predictable, almost comfortable rhythm for Carl. The backbreaking work, the meager pay, the simple moments with Katherine, it all started to feel strangely normal. He was so immersed in his new role as a poor man that he let his guard down just for a moment. That's all it took. One afternoon, we're walking through a crowded public square on their day off. The unthinkable square on their day off. The unthinkable happened. A voice from across the plaza called out a name he hadn't heard in months. Simpson. His blood ran cold. He turned his head slightly and saw him, Gregory Vance, a ruthless business rival he'd known for years. Gregory was squinting, a look of confused recognition on his face, trying to place the familiar features on the disheveled man before him. Panic seized Carl in an icy grip. If Gregory recognized him, his secret would be blown wide open. His entire world, this new life he cherished, would evaporate in an instant. Katherine would know everything, and he would lose her forever. Without a second to spare, instinct took over. Carl grabbed Katherine's arm, spun around, and accidentally stumbled into a large street vendor's cart filled with fruit. Oranges and apples went tumbling everywhere, creating a sudden and chaotic diversion. He began apologizing profusely, making a huge scene, bending down to help the frantic vendor. The commotion drew a small crowd, effectively creating a wall of people between him and his past. It was a desperate, split-second plot twist of his own making. When he finally dared to glance back, Gregory was gone, likely having dismissed the sighting as a strange coincidence. The immediate threat had passed, but the adrenaline left Carl shaken to his core. He had almost lost everything. The close call was a brutal reminder of the precariousness of his situation. His secret wasn't just a quiet, personal burden. It was an active, dangerous entity that could erupt at any moment and destroy the happiness he was just beginning to find. Katherine, ever so kind, was concerned only for him, asking if he was all right after the fall. She had no idea that the clumsy accident was a calculated act of desperation, a maneuver to protect his hidden identity. He brushed it off with a nervous laugh, but the weight of his deception settled back on him, heavier than ever before. He was living on a knife's edge, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he slipped. The incident reinforced the monumental gap between his two lives. He was Carl Simpson, the tycoon, and just Carl, the poor man, and those two identities were on a collision course. He felt trapped, a prisoner of his own creation. He had fled his old life seeking freedom, but he had only managed to build a more complex and fragile cage for himself. And he was beginning to fear that this new cage was one he would never survive leaving. Just as Carl was reeling from his close call, a different kind of crisis struck, one that hit far closer to home. He arrived at Katherine's apartment one evening to find her sitting at her small table, staring at a piece of paper with a look of utter despair. It was an eviction notice. The building had been sold. The new owners were raising the rent to an astronomical figure, and she had 30 days to either pay up or get out. For a woman living paycheck to paycheck, it was a death sentence to her stability. A wave of torment washed over Carl, so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. He, a man who could buy and sell buildings like this without even checking. His bank balance stood there completely helpless. He had the power to end her suffering in a single heartbeat, to write a check that would solve this problem and 1,000 others for her. But he couldn't. His persona as Carl, the poor man, rendered him as powerless as she was. He was trapped, a billionaire in a pauper's prison. The lie he had constructed to find freedom was now the very thing causing the person he cared about most to suffer. It was a gut-wrenching, emotional paradox. Every tear she shed was a dagger in his heart, a testament to his own selfishness. He had wanted to experience the real world, and now he was getting a front-row seat to its casual cruelty, unable to use any of the resources he had to fight back. His grand experiment had just found its first real victim, Katherine. He spent sleepless nights wrestling with his conscience. Should he confess his secret? The thought was terrifying. Revealing his hidden identity now, in her moment of crisis, would feel like a cruel joke. She would see it not as a solution, but as the ultimate betrayal proof that her struggles had been nothing but a spectacle for a bored tycoon. He couldn't bear the thought of her looking at him with hatred and disgust, the kindness in her eyes replaced by contempt. So he remained silent, his secret a toxic poison in his veins. He offered her what little comfort he could, a shoulder to cry on, empty. Words of encouragement while the solution was sitting, useless, in his memory of offshore accounts and stock portfolios. The torment was excruciating. He felt like a fraud, a coward and a failure. He had come to this life to survive, but he was now watching the woman who saved him sink, and he was doing nothing. This was the true test of his journey, he realized. It wasn't about surviving poverty himself. It was about watching someone he loved endure it while he held the key to her salvation. The situation felt impossible, a dead end with no good options. He couldn't give her money, but maybe, just maybe, there was another part of his old life he could use without shattering the illusion. A different kind of currency he still possessed in spades. Watching Katherine frantically search for new apartments she couldn't afford and stress over her job security was unbearable for Carl. He had to do something. He couldn't offer her money, but he still possessed the mind of a tycoon, a brain wired for strategy and efficiency. He started paying closer attention when she talked about her work at the diner, and he quickly identified a glaring inefficiency in their inventory management that was costing the owner a small fortune, keeping wages stagnant. It was a problem he could solve in his sleep. One evening, as she was lamenting about her boss's financial woes, Carl made his move. He framed it cautiously, pretending it was just a random thought. "You know," he began, "I worked a temp job at a warehouse once, a long time ago. They had this system for tracking stock. It's a silly idea, probably, but what if you guys tried?" He then laid out a brilliant yet simple supply chain solution, disguising his show-level advice as the ramblings of a former manual laborer. It was a huge risk. Katherine, desperate for any positive news, listened intently. The idea was surprisingly insightful, a flash of unexpected wisdom from the quiet dishwasher. She was impressed. The next day, she nervously approached her boss and pitched Carl's idea. The owner, skeptical but desperate, agreed to give it a try. Within a week, the results were astounding. The diner was saving a significant amount of money, and for the first time in years, the owner was able to give everyone, including Katherine, a small but life-changing raise. The surprise on Katherine's face when she told Carl the news was a sight to behold. She looked at him with a new kind of awe and respect. "Carl, you're some kind of secret genius." She laughed, punching him playfully on the arm. "Who knew?" He just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, feeling a wave of relief and pride. He had helped her. He had used his true self, his mind, without shattering his hidden identity. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. This event subtly shifted their dynamic. She began to see him as more than just a man she was helping survive. He was her peer, a man of hidden depths and surprising intellect. The anonymous advice had worked a small miracle, giving her the financial breathing room she needed to find a new place. It was a heartaching testament to the fact that his greatest asset wasn't his fortune, but his men, the part of the tycoon Carl Simpson that he could share without revealing the whole truth. The success of his gambit filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. He had found a way to bridge his two worlds, to use the skills of the tycoon to help the people in the poor man's life. This deepened their bond in a way that simple charity never could have, creating a partnership built on mutual respect and admiration. He was beginning to feel like he truly belonged here, and the thought of their budding love story filled him with a happiness he had never known was possible. With the immediate crisis of the eviction averted, a sense of peace settled over Carl and Katherine. The foundation of their relationship, once based on her kindness and his survival, had blossomed into something far more profound. They started spending all their free time together, not out of necessity, but out of a genuine desire for each other's company. Their connection was no longer just about hardship, it was now about shared joy and the discovery of a deep, emotional bond that felt like destiny. Their happiness wasn't found in grand gestures or expensive outings. It was discovered in the simplest of moments, the kind of moments Carl's money could never have manufactured. They found solace walking through the park at dusk, sharing a single bag of popcorn, their laughter echoing in the quiet evening air. They would sit for hours on her tiny fire escape, talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears under the vast, star-dusted sky. These were the moments that defined their love story. For Carl, this was a revelation. He had spent his entire life believing that happiness was a commodity to be purchased, a goal to be achieved through acquisition. But with Katherine, he discovered that true happiness was a quiet, unassuming thing. It was in the way she smiled when he told a bad joke, or the comfortable silence that could fall between them without an ounce of awkwardness. He was experiencing a richness of life that made his former existence as a tycoon feel like a pale, colorless imitation. This period was a heartaching masterclass in the beauty of simplicity. They were two people with practically nothing to their names, yet they felt like the wealthiest couple in the world. Their bond was forged in the crucible of hardship and tempered by genuine affection and respect. It was a true love, untainted by status, expectation, or material wealth. Carl felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of finally being home after a lifetime of wandering through empty, gilded halls. Katherine, too, was blossoming. With Carl by her side, the world didn't seem so harsh. He was her rock, her confidant, and her partner in navigating life's small joys and sorrows. She found herself falling for his quiet strength, his surprising wisdom, and the deep well of kindness she saw in him. She felt seen and appreciated in a way she never had before. Their connection was a sanctuary, a safe harbor from the storms of their respective lives. They were building a world together, a small perfect world for two. It was a world where a man's worth was measured by the kindness in his heart, not the size of his wallet. In these simple, stolen moments, Carl forgot he was a TYCOON with a secret. He was just a man in love with an extraordinary woman. But as they floated in their blissful bubble, they were blissfully unaware that the outside world, with all its harsh judgments and class divides, was about to test the strength of their profound bond. The test came on a busy Tuesday night at the diner. The place was packed, and Carl was rushing to keep up with the mountain of dishes. A wealthy couple, dripping with designer clothes and an air of entitlement, was seated in Katherine's section. The man, a loud and arrogant tycoon in the making, was exactly the type of person Carl used to be. He treated Katherine with dismissive condescension, but she handled it with her usual professional grace, a skill honed by years of practice. The situation escalated when the man, wanting to complain about his steak, snapped his fingers in Carl's direction as he passed by. "Hey you, dish boy," he sneered, looking at Carl as if he were something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Get the manager." Now the disdain was palpable, a casual cruelty meant to assert his dominance. Carl froze, the insult a ghostly echo of a world he desperately wanted to forget. He felt a familiar cold shame creeping up his spine. But before Carl could even respond, Katherine was there. She placed herself squarely between Carl and the irate customer, her eyes flashing with a protective fire he had never seen before. "Do not speak to him that way," she said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the diner's noise. "His name is Carl. He's a good man and he works harder than anyone in this room. You will show him respect, or you can leave." The entire diner fell silent, stunned by her fierce defense. The wealthy customer, taken aback by her audacity, stammered for a moment before scoffing and demanding the check, leaving in a huff. But Carl barely noticed. All he could see was Katherine, standing there like a lioness protecting her own. In that single heart-aching moment, she had proven everything. Her loyalty wasn't to a title or a bank account, it was to his character, the character of the poor man she believed him to be. It was the purest validation of true love he could ever imagine. She had stood up to a man who represented everything he used to be, in defense of the man he had become. The irony was beautiful and devastating. He had never had anyone defend his honor like that in his entire life. In his world, loyalty was a commodity, bought and sold. But Katherine's loyalty was earned, and it was priceless. His love for her swelled into an overwhelming, emotional wave, threatening to break down all his carefully constructed walls. He was filled with both adoration for her and a crushing guilt for the secret he was keeping. She had defended a man who didn't truly exist, a carefully crafted fiction. This act of kindness, this fierce display of her love story with the man she thought he was, made him realize that the truth, when it eventually came out, would be a betrayal of catastrophic proportions. He loved her more than ever, and he was more terrified than ever of losing her. The aftermath of the diner incident left a profound mark on Carl. He was deeply moved by Katherine's defense, but it also amplified the guilt that was now his constant companion. A few days later, he was arriving at her apartment to walk her to work when he heard her talking through the slightly ajar door. She was on the phone with a friend, and he stopped, knowing he shouldn't listen, but physically unable to walk away. Her friend was apparently asking about her new boyfriend. He heard Katherine laugh, a sound that always made his heart ache with affection. "I don't know, it's just, he's different," she said, her voice soft and full of emotion. "He has nothing. I mean, literally nothing, but it doesn't matter. It's his kindness, you know. He has this quiet strength and this incredibly sharp mind. He makes me feel safe. That's all that matters to me." The words struck Carl with the force of a physical blow, a direct hit to his already conflicted soul. That was it. That was the core of everything. It wasn't about status or success, it was about kindness. The very quality she admired in him was interwoven with the biggest lie he had ever told. This beautiful, heart-aching confession, meant only for a friend, solidified his love for her beyond any doubt. He knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that this was true love. He had found the one thing he'd been searching for his entire empty life. And with that certainty came an avalanche of guilt so immense it was suffocating. He was deceiving this wonderful, pure-hearted woman. Their entire love story was predicated on a false identity. He felt like the lowest kind of criminal, stealing the affections of an innocent person under false pretenses. The weight of his secret was no longer just a burden, it was a corrupting influence, tainting the most beautiful thing he had ever been a part of. He quietly backed away from the door, his heart a chaotic mess of joy and despair. He knew he had to tell her the truth. He couldn't keep building their relationship on this foundation of lies. It wasn't fair to her. She deserved the real him, or at least the whole story. He resolved, then and there, that he would find the right time and the right way to confess everything, to lay his past at her feet and pray that her love was strong enough for the coming plot twist. But destiny, it seems, has a cruel sense of timing. Just as he was steeling himself for the confession, for the monumental task of overcoming his deception, the world he had abandoned decided it was done waiting for him. The choice to reveal. His secret was about to be ripped from his hands as a crisis of epic proportions began to brew in the empire of the tycoon known as Carl Simpson, a crisis that was about to go very, very public. The news broke like a thunderclap, impossible to ignore. It was everywhere, in the televisions in the diner, on the newspapers and sidewalk bins, on the phones of strangers passing by. Simpson Corp in crisis, the headlines screamed. A hostile takeover attempt, coupled with a massive internal scandal, had sent the company's stock plummeting. The empire that Carl's grandfather had built, the legacy he had so carelessly walked away from, was on the brink of collapse. His family's name was being dragged through the mud. Carl felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He stood, frozen in front of a storefront television, watching a news anchor discuss the mysterious disappearance of CEO Carl Simpson months prior, labeling him a coward who had abandoned his ship in its time of need. The words were a punch to the gut. He had wanted to escape his responsibilities, but he had never intended for his actions to destroy the livelihoods of the thousands of people who worked for his company. He was torn. His new life with Katherine was everything he had ever wanted. It was real, it was meaningful, and it was built on a simple, beautiful truth, or so she thought. But the life he'd left behind, the world of the tycoon, was now calling to him with a siren song of duty and responsibility. He was the only one who knew the company's intricacies well enough, the only one with the strategic mind to fend off the corporate vultures circling his family's legacy. It was an impossible emotional choice. If he returned, he would have to reveal his secret to Katherine in the worst way imaginable, it as a quiet confession, but as a public spectacle. He would lose her and the life that had taught him how to be human. But if he stayed, if he let his company crumble, he would be betraying his family and all the employees who depended on him. It was a choice between his newfound personal happiness and his lifelong public duty. He knew with a sinking feeling of dread what he had to do. He couldn't stand by and watch everything his family had built turn to dust because of his selfish quest for enlightenment. The journey of overcoming his own emptiness had led him to this point, but now he had to face the consequences of his initial actions. He had to go back. His destiny, it seemed, was not something he could so easily escape. The question was no longer if he would return, but how. And how, in God's name, would he ever explain this to Katherine? He felt a profound sense of impending doom. He was about to trade his simple, happy love story for a corporate war, and in the process, he was going to break the heart of the only person who had ever shown him true kindness. The secret was about to come out, and he knew it was going to cause a world of pain. Katherine was tidying up her small apartment, the television humming quietly in the background, when a breaking news banner flashed across the screen. She barely paid attention until she heard the name Simpson Corp. She paused, a flicker of recognition from Carl's job hunt stories, and glanced at the screen. The anchor was talking about the missing CEO, the reclusive tycoon Carl Simpson, who was desperately needed to save his company. And then they showed his picture. The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor in a spray of ceramic and cold liquid. But she didn't hear it. All she could hear was the blood rushing in her ears as she stared at the face on the screen. It was him. It was her Carl, the same eyes, the same face. But this man was wearing an expensive suit, his expression confident and powerful. He wasn't the humble, down-in-his-luck man she knew. He was a billionaire, a tycoon. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over her. It couldn't be real. It was a mistake, a coincidence, some kind of cruel joke. But the name, Carl Simpson, echoed in the news report, confirming the impossible. The man she had fed, the man she had worked alongside, the man she had defended and fallen in love with, was a lie. Her entire relationship, every shared smile, every quiet conversation, flashed before her eyes, now tainted with the poison of deceit. The initial shock quickly curdled into a deep, devastating feeling of betrayal. She felt like the world's biggest fool. He hadn't been a poor man, she was. Helping to survive, he was a wealthy tycoon playing a game, and she had been his unwitting pawn. Her kindness, her compassion, her love had it all been part of his little experiment in poverty. The thought was humiliating, a burning shame that made her skin crawl. The emotional pain was so intense it was physical. The plot twist was so sudden, so catastrophic that it completely upended her reality. The man she loved didn't exist. He was a character, a role played by a stranger from a world so different from hers. It might as well have been another planet. Every memory was now a question. Was his gratitude real? Were his struggles genuine? Was any of it true? Or was she just a source of amusement for a bored billionaire? She sank to the floor amidst the broken shards of the coffee cup, her body trembling with a mix of heartbreak and rage. The surprise wasn't just that he was rich, it was the depth of the deception. He had watched her struggle, he had listened to her money worries, all while hiding a fortune that could end all her problems. The secret head kept wasn't just about his identity, it was a fundamental betrayal of trust that felt utterly irreparable. Her heart-aching love story had just been revealed as a tragic farce. Katherine didn't have much time to process the devastating revelation. A few hours later, as she was still sitting in a numb haze, a sleek black car, the kind that looks completely alien on her modest street, pulled up to her building. Two men in impeccably tailored suits got out. They moved with an air of cold corporate efficiency that made her stomach clench. They knocked on her door, and when she opened it, they didn't smile. They looked at her, then around her tiny apartment, with undisguised disdain. "We're looking for Mr. Carl Simpson," the taller man said, his voice devoid of any warmth. It wasn't a question. They knew he had been there. "He is required back at the office immediately." Their eyes swept over her again, and she could feel their silent judgment. They saw a poor, insignificant woman, a temporary distraction, an embarrassing chapter in their boss's inexplicable escapade. Their sneering expressions confirmed all her worst fears. They treated her not as a person, but as an obstacle, a minor detail to be handled and dismissed. When she stood there, speechless, they became impatient. "Listen, lady," the second man chimed in, his tone sharp. "Whatever little game you two were playing is over. The real world is calling." The casual cruelty of his words, the dismissal of her life and her feelings as a little game, was like a slap in the face. It was a stark, brutal confirmation of the gap between their worlds. This was his life. These cold, dismissive people were his associates. This was the world the tycoon belonged to, a world where a person like her was seen as nothing. The kindness and humility she had loved in Carl felt like a distant dream, completely at odds with the arrogant reality these men represented. They were the physical embodiment of the lie he had been living. She saw in their eyes how his world would always see her as the poor girl he slummed it with for a while. The emotional pain of the initial betrayal was now compounded by this raw, class-based humiliation. They didn't even bother to hide their contempt for her humble life. In that moment, she believed with absolute certainty that his time with her had been nothing more than an experiment. He had wanted to see how the other half lived, and now that his vacation was over, he was being recalled to his real life, leaving her behind with the wreckage. They didn't wait for her to invite them in. They simply pushed past her, confirming that Carl was not there, and left as quickly as they arrived, leaving her feeling violated and utterly worthless. The encounter was a brutal affirmation that she didn't belong in his world, and he had never truly belonged in hers. The chasm between the tycoon and the poor man was no longer a secret, it was a gaping wound, and she was standing on the wrong side of it. When his associates finally located him, Carl wasn't in Katherine's world, but not yet fully back in his own. They found him on a park bench, the same one where he and Katherine had shared popcorn, trying to figure out his next move. The moment he stepped back into the waiting car, the transition was jarring. The scent of worn fabric and diner grease was replaced by the smell of expensive leather and sanitized air. The world of the tycoon reclaimed him instantly, and it felt utterly foreign. Back in his penthouse, surrounded by the cold, sterile luxury he had once craved, he felt a profound and aching emptiness. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man in a borrowed suit, looking lost and out of place. He listened to his associates brief him on the corporate crisis, their voices a meaningless drone in the background. All he could think about was the look of disdain they must have given Katherine, the way they would have looked at her simple, honest life. It was in that moment, seeing his old life through his new eyes, that the final piece of his transformation clicked into place. The epiphany was so clear and powerful it took his breath away. He hadn't run away from wealth, he had run away from poverty. But not the kind of poverty he had experienced on the streets. He had been living in a state of profound spiritual and emotional poverty, surrounded by opulence but starved of genuine connection and kindness. A world without Katherine's genuine goodness, her fierce loyalty, her unconditional love, that was the true poverty. The endless meetings, the power plays, the sycophants who surrounded him, this wasn't richness. It was a barren wasteland. The real wealth he had found was in the simple, heart-aching moments with her. He had traded a kingdom of gold for a single perfect pearl, and now he had carelessly let it slip through his fingers. His redemption wouldn't come from saving his company. He looked at his frantic associates, their faces etched with worry about stock prices and board meetings, and he felt nothing but a deep, sorrowful pity for them. They were all trapped in the same gilded cage he had just escaped. They were all chasing a phantom, believing that power and money were the ultimate prize, blind to the real treasures of the human heart. He knew now what he had to do, and it had very little to do with the fate of Simpson Corp. His priority was no longer the company, it was Katherine. He had to get back to her, to try and explain the inexplicable. He had broken something beautiful and perfect with his secret, and the thought of living in a world without her warmth was a fate worse than any corporate failure. He finally understood the difference between a tycoon and a rich man. He had been a tycoon. Now he just wanted to be a man worthy of her true love. Carl rushed back to Katherine's apartment, his heart pounding with a desperate mix of hope and fear. He found her at home, her eyes redrimmed and guarded. The warmth that used to greet him was gone, replaced by a wall of ice. He started talking, the words tumbling out of him in a frantic emotional torrent. He tried to explain the emptiness of his old life, the suffocating loneliness, his desperate search for something real, for a connection that wasn't transactional. He told her everything about his unhappiness, his foolish idea to disappear, and how her kindness had been the first genuine thing he'd felt in years. He confessed that his love for her was the most real and profound truth of his life. But his words, which sounded so sincere in his own head, seemed to fall flat in the cold, tense air of the room. To her, they sounded like excuses, like the well-rehearsed lines of a tycoon used to getting his way, manipulating situations to his advantage. "An experiment?" she finally said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage and heartbreak. "So that's what I was. Your little social experiment? Did you take notes, Carl? Did you write down how the poor girl fell for your act?" Each question was a dagger, twisting in the wound of his own making. She couldn't see past the lie. The monumental secret he had kept for so long had become an impenetrable barrier between them, blocking any truth he now tried to offer. He tried to protest, to tell her she was more than that she was everything. But the trust between them had been completely obliterated. From her perspective, their entire love story had been a sham. He had possessed the power to alleviate her struggles the entire time and had chosen to watch her suffer for the sake of his journey. How could she possibly believe that his feelings were genuine when their entire foundation was a lie? Her heart was too broken to see the man, only the deceit. It was an emotional checkmate. Every plea for forgiveness sounded hollow, every declaration of love felt like another manipulation. He had built his new identity to find true love, and in a cruel plot twist of his own making, that very identity was now the reason he was losing it. He saw in her eyes that words were not enough. They were meaningless noise against the deafening roar of his betrayal. He had broken her heart, and he couldn't fix it with a simple apology. He left her apartment that day a broken man, understanding the true cost of his deception. He had found what he was looking for, only to destroy it with his own hands. The pain of her rejection was a far greater poverty than anything he had experienced on the streets. But as he walked away, a new resolve began to form. If words couldn't prove his transformation was real, then he would have to find another way. He would have to show her in a way the entire world could see. Instead of diving back into the corporate war, Carl Simpson did something that sent shockwaves through the financial world. He called a press conference, but not to discuss the takeover bid. He stood before the cameras not as a defiant tycoon, but as a humbled man on a mission of redemption. He publicly announced that he was putting a significant portion of his personal fortune into a new charitable foundation aimed at creating community support systems for the working poor in the very neighborhood he had just left. He named it the Katherine Butler Foundation. In front of the entire world, he told the story of a compassionate woman who, despite having very little, offered kindness to a stranger. He didn't spare himself, confessing that he was that stranger, a man who had lost his way and was lost in a world of wealth. His voice, thick with emotion, declared that Catherine's kindness hadn't just helped him survive, she had taught him how to truly live, how to be a human being again. It was a grand public act of overcoming his past self. He used the immense power and resources of the tycoon not to accumulate more wealth, but to amplify the very kindness she had shown him. The foundation wasn't a handout, it was a system designed with the quiet wisdom he had learned from her, focusing on dignity, community, and support. It was his apology, his confession, and his declaration of love all rolled into one broadcast for the world and for her to see. The final part of his speech was addressed directly to her, wherever she was watching. "My fortune is meaningless without the values you taught me," he said, his eyes finding the camera. "I am choosing you. I am choosing this life, the one you showed me. All I ask is for your forgiveness." It was the ultimate surrender, choosing true love over his empire, publicly declaring his allegiance to her world and her values. It was a heartache plea for a second chance. This act of redemption was the final stunning plot twist in their love story. He wasn't trying to buy her forgiveness with his money. He was using his money to prove that he had finally understood its true purpose: to help, to heal, and to honor the goodness she represented. He had completed his journey from a selfish tycoon to a man who understood that true wealth is measured in love and kindness. He stepped away from the podium, leaving the world abuzz about his shocking announcement. He had laid his cards on the table, his heart bare for all to see. He had made his choice, a choice guided by the destiny that had so strangely brought them together. Now, all he could do was wait and hope that his grand gesture was enough to mend a heart broken by his secret, and that his quest for true love would not end in forgiveness sought, but not granted. What an incredible journey of the heart we've just witnessed. We saw a tycoon shed his identity to become a poor man, only to discover that true wealth was never about money. It was about kindness, connection, and a love so profound it inspired a complete redemption. From the weight of a monumental secret to the freedom of a public confession, this story shows us that sometimes you have to lose everything you think you are to find everything you're meant to be. It's a powerful reminder that the most heartaching moments in life are the ones that can't be bought. Now we'd love to hear from you. This story was an emotional roller coaster, and we want to know how it made you feel. What was the one moment in this love story that impacted you the most? When Katherine discovered his hidden identity, what was your reaction? Let's talk about that incredible ending. Were you expecting a different outcome, or did you love the final desfecho, the final resolution? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. We truly read and value every single one. If this story of overcoming and true love resonated with you, please show your support by giving this video a like. It helps our community grow. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. We invite you to explore our older videos for more emotional journeys like this one. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we can't wait to see you again very soon.